Hi, I'm Ken Kessler, and welcome to the Sounds of Christmas podcast. If you're new to this podcast, I want to start by saying thanks for joining us. That said, and just so there are no misunderstandings, there won't be any music played here. This is a place for conversation. I'll talk about Christmas music and some related topics, sometimes by myself and sometimes with guests. If you're looking for music, just go to soundsofchristmas.com and click on the tree or the player on the front page or on the Listen Now page. We play the best variety of Christmas music all year long. Well, except in October, when we play the best variety of Halloween music. Today, I want to talk about a couple pet peeves I have with Rudolph and the other reindeer. Rudolph has an interesting story. Back in the 1930s, the retail store Montgomery Ward had been buying and giving away coloring books at Christmas time, and they decided they could save money if they created their own coloring books rather than buying somebody else's. Robert May was charged with coming up with the content, and he created the story of Rudolph. Originally, it was written out like a poem, very similar in style to A Visit from St. Nicholas, which many of us know as The Night Before Christmas. The store gave away almost 2.5 million copies of Rudolph the first time around. That was in 1939. 8 years later, Rudolph became a mass market publication, and the story was available all over the country. A couple of years later, Robert May's brother-in-law, Johnny Marks, put the story to music. Gene Autry recorded it that summer after his wife convinced him to, and it was released as a children's record in the fall. It gained popularity and radio airplay in December, and it made it all the way to number one. In fact, that version has the dubious distinction of being the only song to hit number one and then completely drop off the charts the next week. I also find it interesting to note that some 70 years later, Gene Autry's version of Rudolph made it back on the charts every December over the last few years. Now, Rudolph has been covered by lots of singers and bands, and we play a lot of those different versions. In 1964, Burl Ives recorded one of the most popular and beloved versions for the Rankin and Bass TV special. Burl would record it again the next year for his own Christmas album, and that's why sometimes you hear different versions of that song by Burl Ives. Dean Martin recorded a fun version of Rudolph, and John Denver did too, with a little help from the Muppets, something that Jimmy Fallon revisited on his late night show many years later. Last year, Meghan Trainor and Pentatonix both gave us their takes on this classic. There are a couple things, though, that have always bugged me about this song. The first is probably the obvious one. It's a song about someone that is different, and everyone he knows makes fun of him, right up until the point that they need him. Then, and only then, do they accept him. There are two particular instances where it seems like this gets addressed, and I'm pretty happy with those takes. The first one is the 1964 Rankin and Bass TV special. Everyone, including Rudolph's own parents and even Santa Claus, treated him really badly, made fun of him, called him names, ostracized him. And then they turned around and they acted grateful when he helped to save Christmas. When the apologies come out and they all agree to treat Rudolph better, he uses the moment to help out all of his misfit friends. And this is something that the folks at the network had to go back and fix. After the first year this special aired, they went back and they changed the end scene where the credits play so you can see Santa picking up the misfit toys and taking them out and giving them to children. Everybody wanted a happy ending for the misfits. So Rudolph, who had been branded a weirdo that wouldn't fit in, is suddenly cast into the spotlight as a hero, and he seizes on that opportunity to get acceptance for his friends, which I think is a pretty good ending. Side note, maybe it's just me, but I've always felt that the elves were really the ones to blame for the problems of all the misfit toys, since the elves are the one that make the toys in the first place. Anyway, on to the next one. The other instance of Rudolph where I think the story gets a good ending is the version recorded by Jack Johnson. He wrote some additional lyrics after the traditional ending of the song where the reindeer were saying Rudolph would go down in history. In Jack Johnson's version, Rudolph asked them how they could look him in the face when only yesterday they called him names. Then the rest of the reindeer felt ashamed, apologized, and promised they were truly going to try and change. So really, this is a minor thing. It's a pet peeve to me. I'm not trying to start a movement about it, and I'm certainly not calling for a boycott of the song or threatening to ban it from my station or anything like that. It's just one of those things that I can't help thinking about every time I hear that song. The other thing I want to mention is that the names of the reindeer are Dasher, Dancer, Prancer, Vixen, Comet, Cupid, Donder, and Blitzen. Donder. In the poem A Visit from St. Nicholas, C. Clement Moore became the first to give Santa's reindeer names. The last two were named Donder and Blitzen, which was German for thunder and lightning. So it's Donder. Interestingly enough, or at least interesting to me, in 1902, about 80 years after Moore's poem had been published, L. Frank Baum, the man who wrote The Wizard of Oz and the rest of the Oz books, wrote a book called The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus. And in that book, Santa had 10 reindeer, and none had the names from Moore's poem. Those reindeer were Flossie, Glossy, Racer, Pacer, Fearless, Peerless, Ready, Steady, Feckless, and Speckless. Baum had several stories that brought Santa into his world of Oz in both short stories and in the book The Road to Oz. And Rankin and Bass actually made a TV special of the life and adventures of Santa Claus in the 80s, though in that special, there were 8 reindeer instead of Baum's 10, and they went unnamed. Anyway, back to Rudolph. Rudolph's story has continued in sequels for over 50 years. Robert May wrote an unpublished sequel called Rudolph's Second Christmas back in 1947. The company that published the mass market version of Rudolph put their own sequel out in 1954 called Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer Shines Again. About 30 years ago, Penguin Books combined those two sequels into one book called Rudolph to the Rescue. Different versions of Rudolph have appeared in comic books, children's books, various TV specials, and movies, and they all take their own poetic license with different aspects of the story. So it's quite possible you have a favorite that I haven't mentioned, just like you may have a favorite version of the song that I haven't mentioned either. And that's why I play so many different versions, so that everyone has a chance, I hope, to hear their favorite. Anyway, thanks for listening to my pet peeves about Rudolph and Company. I hope it at least entertained you. And thanks for helping this podcast to continue to grow. We're now on about 24 different podcasting sites. Since you're listening to this now, you've obviously found us somewhere. But if there's another site you like to use for podcasts, check out our podcast page on our website for the complete list of everywhere you can listen to the Sounds of Christmas podcast. Again, the website is www.soundsofchristmas.com. Then just click on the podcast tab. For the Sounds of Christmas station, to listen to the music, you'll need to stick with our website or our app in the Google Play Store. In the meantime, thank you for listening. If you have comments or suggestions, feel free to reach out to me on social media or through the website. Thanks again, and may you always believe in Santa Claus.